Namaskar and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. Apart from the ups and downs in political field in the domestic politics, the one news headline that kept disturbing people, hogging the headlines and creating discussions across media platforms through the week was the audacious attempt by Khalistani forces to attack our embassies and to make threats on the lives of the functionaries serving the nation on foreign soil. What triggered this sudden spurt in the audacity, the violence from the Khalistani side? And will there never be a line drawn by the foreign countries, those host countries, about where the political protest ends and actual terror begins? Let's discuss. Let me take you immediately to our special guests this evening. I have here with me well-known strategic expert, author Colonel R.S.N. Singh. You have been hearing him on Media Scan on various occasions. Welcome back, Colonel Sahab. So good to have you, sir.
Not.
Also with me, a friend from the US who has seen it all, a communications analyst, an expert on the Indian community working there. He has been part of the political media team, the media team of various well-known politicians in the US. Very happy to welcome Anang Mittal. Namaskar, Anang. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And also another guest joining us for the first time on the show, Ramneek Singh Man, who lives in Chandigarh, a true blue Punjabi who is known to speak his mind and has been fighting for the identity, for the pride of the community against these forces who want to divide India on the lines of religion and community. Welcome to Media Scan, Ramneek Singh. Namaskar.
Good evening, Sumita ji. Sat Shri Akal, Namaste and Jai Hind to everyone.
Sat Shri Akal, and can I start with Colonel R.S.N. Singh immediately? Sir, very recently we were discussing with our experts when Niger was killed about how the host countries were not doing sufficient action in order to rein in these terrorists. But now it seems it has gone one step further. After the attack on one of our embassies in San Francisco and those very, very objectionable posters calling for violence against our foreign service officers, do you really think a line is being drawn at all? What is your response about the attitude of the host countries with regard to all these developments? Colonel.
I must tell you why this attitude on part of the Western country. Remember one thing, that this entire Khalistan, movement was at the behest of the CIA in collusion with the ISI after the 1971 war, because the Pakistanis were very bitter, and they had to be, because they were broken into two pieces, two halves. And then Americans, they were also licking their, wounds after, having sent their 7th Fleet and trying to come to aid to Pakistan. So that was a big defeat as far as the Americans were concerned during the peak of the Cold War. And that is how they started this Khalistan movement. And in this, enterprise, I would say, or this conspiracy, not only the CIA, the ISI, the intelligence agencies of various Western countries were involved, including the intelligence agency of Canada. And now what has happened is that, remember one thing, yes, there is a strategic congruency between the two countries. We have landed up in the same geopolitical structure, because of, concourse of circumstances. By way of Indo-Pacific strategy or Quads or whatever you may call it, or as a counterpoise to China. But remember, the last thing that these Western countries want is stability in India. They thrive when there is instability, and they also hate any kind of strong leadership.
Colonel Singh,
yes.
Why would a nation looking for India as a strategic partner want to destabilize that same country? I mean, do these things add up really?
No, that is what I was saying. That they want your strategic partnership, but at the same time they do not want a strong leader
Fine, fine.
because
I'll come back to you
because
on that, sir. Allow
because
me
a
to bring
strong
in. Yes, please make your point.
because a strong leader would take autonomous strategic positions.
Right.
Like for example, the position we have taken on Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Correct.
So
So,
who would like it?
right. So, I'll come to Anang Mittal on that same question, because there are some very, Anang Mittal, Colonel Singh has given us a historic perspective, into how this whole thing started, and very valuable information there. However, the situation today as we see it, particularly in the light of Prime Minister's recent trip to the US, why would a country looking at India as a very, very valuable partner want to destabilize that country and give a free hand to people who want the breakup of the nation, number one? Also with that, my quick question is, the recent statements from the side of US government functionaries and even in Canada and London, do you think they spell a certain shift? There is at least some realization that this has gone too far, or is it just statements?
Well, I think you have to differentiate how the Canadian authorities, the Canadian leadership, the political leadership there looks at the Khalistan issue versus how the Americans look at it. I would not venture to, disagree with the colonel there. I'm sure he has his knowledge, but I certainly don't think that the current CIA, as it currently exists, maybe not in the 1970s, has any interest in fomenting the Khalistan movement as such. I certainly agree that the ISI and other foreign, sort of agents are interested in those kind of things and are supporting, some of these Khalistani folks. But I do think that the statements made by Justin Trudeau and a lot of the Canadian leadership there are obviously Indian politicians or Indian origin politicians in Canada who have, condemned the Khalistan, these posters that have come out and the rally that's going to be happening on Saturday. But I don't think that Justin Trudeau is quite honestly interested in doing anything of substance on those issues, because the second largest party in his coalition, the NDP, is headed by Jagmeet Singh, who is a very, pro-Pakistani, pro-Khalistani politician. Let's cut to the quick there. I don't think there's a real understanding of Khalistan in the United States, quite honestly. Having worked in the Senate, having met with the congressmen, most of them just do not have any understanding of Khalistan. The ones who do maybe are from the California side. So, as they say, the vote bank politics that are going on in Canada sort of are being reflected as well in the Khalistani activists in California who are supporting things like the SB 403 bill, the anti-caste bill, and those kind of, sort of subtle activism and lobbying that's going on amongst California politicians and politics.
What are you doing about those lobbies? People like you, right-thinking Indians who do not want American soil to become a platform for, people who want to call for the breakup of India. What is, when I say you, I mean the right-thinking Indian community, the patriots, people who want both America and India to be peaceful, and also that enemies of the nation are not given a platform there.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I think most Indian Americans or most Indians who emigrate here, they just want to keep their head down. They want to keep their jobs. They don't want to get involved in a lot of controversial topics. Myself may be excluded, and some other Indians as well. So I think for the most part, the Indians that are really working hard to raise the awareness of this issue have done a lot, but probably not enough, because it's just not a priority in Indian American issues here. Obviously, the attacks on the consulate have,
I'll come to you. I'll come to you about some of, while, as you said, most of the Indian Americans must be busy with the bread and butter issues. But then there are think tanks, there are activists who are being funded from various sources who do not want India to remain a united, a harmonious country. I'll come back to you on that, Anang. But can I please bring in Ramneet Singh Mann here? Mr. Mann, just want to know, isn't it, it's a dichotomy, you see. These Khalistanis do not want to create Khalistan in Canada or US or Australia. They want a Khalistan made out of India. However, I do not see them, and even the experts I have been talking to, they say one reason they are getting so desperate, perhaps, even going to the extent of calling for the killing of our foreign service officers, our diplomats, is perhaps because they are finding zero traction in India. So all they can do is make this noise abroad. But on the global level, it does not really reflect well on us, as also on the host countries. What would you say about how the community is taking these activities, these threats and these protests?
Okay, Smita ji, okay, let me tell you, these Khalistanis that you see on your televisions or you hear on the social media are not Indian citizens. They're not even NRIs. They're American citizens, they're British citizens, or they're Canadian citizens. They're citizens of those host nations. As a matter of fact, the people who've been calling out the Khalistani agenda or they're calling for freedom rallies are actually not Indian citizens. Somebody who's been killed was also not an Indian citizen. He was again a foreign citizen.
Yes,
Now,
so the
this
point
has to
is-
be dealt with. I'm sorry.
Yes, so what is the point?
Yeah, I'm
If
coming to that.
non-Indian citizens are calling
I'm
for
coming
the
to that.
dismemberment of India,
I'm coming to that.
Yes.
I'm coming to that. Now, it is upon the host nation to deal with their citizens who are trying to call for a division of India or for balkanization of India or for a separate state within India. I would say their demands would have been legitimate if they were asking for a Khalistan, let's say in British Columbia, in Canada, or they were asking for a Khalistan in Nevada, in the US, or in Gold Coast in the Australian continent. But they are talking about carving out a Khalistani state from the Indian side of Punjab, not even from the Pakistani side of Punjab. You understand?
Yes.
So that is where the circumstantial evidence kicks in. And also, these host nations haven't been taking any strong action. And there is where I agree with Colonel Arjun Singh Saab, that these foreign agencies would want to keep India in a jelly state. They wouldn't want India to get into a liquid state and become an Afghanistan or a Syria or a Iraq, but they would also not want India at the same time to become another China or Russia in the Asian continent. And they would also want to engage with India, and they have this
you mean to become a powerful, confident nation which decides its own foreign policy, its
Well,
own
India
domestic
is already-
policies.
India already is. You see, the Khalistani threat within this nation was dealt with very well. About 4-5 months back,
Correct.
we were thinking about how things are going to be. And once Amrit Pal was stashed away, tucked into a jail in Assam, the things have gone silent and quite on ground. So they are now frustrated and they've been trying to extract a reaction from the Indian state that didn't happen after their temple desecration or the London HCI incident or the attack on the Tiranga rallies. Either it was in Canada or in Australia. So now they have come to this, that they're threatening the Indian diplomats and the Indian diplomatic premises in the host nations just to extract a reaction from the Indian state or the Indian majority community. And if in reaction a Sikh is harmed in India, they would have them cry all over the world that Sikhs are not safe in India and therefore legitimize their demand of a separate Sikh nation.
Fine, fine. Allow me to bring in Colonel Singh back here into the discussion, and then I'll come back to you on the response of the host nations a little more. Colonel Singh, one so-called Khalistani activist gets arrested in India. There is some media headlines there is some carpet coverage in television. Once he is packed away into the jail, not a single person from the community anywhere comes out to protest the arrest, nor do we see a whimper of a protest anywhere across the country. And in fact, to be fair, the media has totally forgotten those activists who were arrested so clearly and so strongly. But across India, in various continents, in the US and in Europe, we see protests happening every week. I mean, what's going on?
And look at the irony. Look
Yes,
at
sir.
the irony. The US, the Indian ambassador to the United States is a Sikh. Taranjeet Singh Sandhu Sahab is there. He's a Sikh.
Yes.
And don't forget that before this, few years back, this was Navteej Singh Sarna. So they don't have even, when they say kill the diplomats, I mean, that is that is their hatred, for any Indian Sikh. So Ramneek Singh Man Sahab is absolutely correct that they are basically foreigners. And gentleman who made a point, yes, I realize that NRIs, their heart does beat for India. They do feel homesick, and but dollar issues are always there, and we totally sympathize with that. But these fellows have totally gone overboard, and sometimes I feel this land of their choosing, whatever it is, promised land, wherever they are there. I mean, where do they get this time for these kind of activities? I mean, they have gone there to, to work for the living. I don't know. I've not been to these countries, the Western, Canada or USA. But I would like to know that as to how do they get time to, indulge in these, I would say anti-Sikh activities. Anti-Sikh, I am saying because they are defiling the Gurudwaras.
True.
So many Gurudwaras, Gurudwaras, have come into the, direct control of, indirect control of the ISI in Canada. And the money that is raised by the Gurudwaras in Canada by these, foreign,
Yes, sir.
Sikh, I'm saying is being used, is used for terrorism purposes.
Yes.
So,
So let me ask Anang Mittal. Anang Mittal, we see, most of the time these protests, these programs and meetings are being held in the presence of the Gurdwaras. Now, it is okay to blame the ISI, but certainly there is a section of the community which is ready to get used by ISI or any of such other powers. My question here is, you said that most Indian Americans or even in other countries, they are, naturally they are busy with their bread and butter issues. They do not have time for politics. But the fact remains that there is this bunch of activists who are ready to get funded by all sorts of Breaking India forces. And they are sort of making themselves available to call for discussions, seminars. Unfortunately, these seminars and discussions in campuses and halls do not remain limited to them. It goes to the extent of threatening violence and even deaths of people. And now we have seen back-to-back attacks on our high commissions, our embassies. Certainly, it is time, while we are giving a very strong diplomatic answer from the Indian government to these countries, and that is why we are seeing some change in their language. But the fact remains that the community living there has to become a little more involved. Giving a free run to these people just because you are too busy with their own lives. I would really want to have your clear assessment of this.
Yes, I would say the sources of funding definitely do need to be, attacked and cut off. And I think some cooperation between the security agencies of all three countries and maybe even all the English-speaking countries, so UK, Canada, India, and America, should be there, and I would certainly advocate for that. I would like to say that that is an issue that I've heard from the Indian American and Sikh American community. That is that, when they try to host Ambassador Sandhu for some of these events, they really can't do it in Gurdwaras. Because most of the times, the Gurdwaras, even if they're willing to have him, there will be, Bhindrawale imagery and those kind of imagery that, the Indian ambassador certainly would not want to be seen with. So that is a present issue that the radicals have, the very small minority of radicals, and as you said, funded, they're funded so they don't have to have jobs. So it's not the people who have jobs who are doing this kind of activism. Maybe in Canada, I would say, because the community is much bigger there. But especially if you talk to people in California or even in the East Coast, in DC, when the prime minister was here, there was, maybe 50 people in California, maybe you can get 100 guys out there, and they're all people who, clearly have no job other than to just do this kind of thing all day long. And that's apart from the thousands, almost 20,000, more than that community in the Bay Area. Just in the Bay Area, there's thousands of Indians. So when there's August 15 events, these guys show up with their placards and they do all kinds of sort of the usual stuff. And most of the time, the Indian community just ignores it. But yes, I do think that they need to be condemned, and I think especially the sources of funding is something that needs to be attacked and figured out where they're getting this funding from, how they're getting. And quite honestly, a lot of the funding is coming from within the community. So again, some of the engagement needs to happen in the community as well.
Too many questions there, very pertinent points. Ramneek Singh Man, is it that a handful of anti-India forces within the community getting funding from all sorts of sources have taken over Gurdwaras and resources, and most of the right-thinking, members of the community are just keeping silent and ignoring them? Or is there maybe a silent support for them?
No, there are three aspects to it. Number one is the funding aspect. Number two is the political patronage and the impunity with which they have been permitted to go on with these anti-India activities on the foreign soils. And number three is the asylum seekers, the political asylum seekers. It's very convenient for these anti-India activists or these Khalistani activists to rope in young boys and girls of the Sikh community and to provide them with certificates or documents that since they are demanding a separate nation of Khalistan, they cannot go back to India. So there are three angles to it. But the most pertinent, I believe,
And
is
if I may add, Mr. Maan, somehow all these people tend to end up in Canada or London. How is that?
No, well, see, like I said, the most pertinent point here is the political patronage. The political patronage is convenient and easily available to the people who are shifting from India to Canada. And the asylum seekers in Canada, the government of Canada has given out policies where they are giving quick green cards and citizenship
Right.
or political asylum to such people who are involved in the Khalistani movement.
Quickly,
Number
Mr.
one.
Maan,
Number two,
yes.
the reason is Jagmeet Singh, his cooperation, his NDP, which is a part of the Canadian government who's supporting Justin Trudeau.
Yes.
And it is a political compulsion of the Prime Minister of Canada to, keep his party in power. He actually is patronizing, I'm being very blunt about it, he's
Fine.
patronizing anti-India forces within Canada.
I get your
This
point,
entire
Mr. Maan.
Khalistan Bogi cannot survive in Canada. One movement cannot survive in Canada without the political patronage provided by the Justin Trudeau government.
Got it. Colonel Singh, one thing is political patronage, but on the funding side, after the proactive approach adopted by our NSA, our foreign ministry, and the government conveying its tough stance at the highest level to Australia, to Canada, to the US, some change in the language is certainly visible. You have hopes that at least to at least satisfy our response, they will take some steps quickly, sir.
You cannot imagine, the sigh of relief or even happiness, with whatever has happened in the last few days or weeks. Somehow, on whatever account some of these, characters have found their, aboard, I don't know. Of course, not in heaven, but, wherever it is. But yes, political patronage.
I think there is a...
Remember, gentleman who was here in the Kisan Andolan, so-called Kisan Andolan. Yeah.
Yes. I
Yes,
think there was a break in your audio, but I think I got your point. Very quickly, Anang Mittal, just 30 seconds I have left with me. These certain strange, mysterious deaths of many, leading so-called Sikh functionaries, these Khalistanis who were calling for the dismemberment of the nation. What is the buzz in the US and Canada regarding this sudden, elimination by whatever means?
Well, there's a saying, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And, quite honestly, a lot of these folks do not seem to be, ordinary citizens of their nations. They tend to be involved in a lot of, sort of criminal activity. So I certainly have no information as such whether these violent acts have happened because of extra, judicial agencies or acts, but certainly seems to be happening with quite regularity. And I don't think that's beyond anybody. I don't think anybody's mourning them apart from some folks in maybe Canada.
Absolutely. Nobody is mourning people. Nobody is mourning people who tried to call for the breakup of our nation, the dismemberment of India. However, that doesn't mean everything is hunky-dory. There are audacious protests, and it is not remaining limited to protests anymore. There are calls for killings of Indian functionaries. Time for the host nations to read the writing on the wall and prove with their actions that they actually do not want to give a safe haven to these people. Only statement perhaps will not do. On that note, it is time to thank all the gentlemen who joined our very interesting discussion this evening. Colonel Arisan Singh, thank you, sir, for joining us at such short notice. Always very informative to speak to you. Also, Anang Mittal, who had to keep awake almost an entire night to join us from the US. Thank you so much. Ramneek Singh Maan, great to have you on the show for the first time. We will come back to you, sir. And in the meanwhile, please keep voicing your thoughts with the same alacrity that you do. Thank you, gentlemen. Khalistani protests, Khalistani threats and actions seem to have become a permanent headline. Interestingly, they do nothing here in India because nobody gives them an ounce of support. So why do the headlines coming from foreign soil do not end? Is it because of the kid glove attitude of the host countries, or is it because enemies of the nation are finding it easier to operate from across continents? Think about it. On that note, it's a wind up on Media Scan for this evening. See you next weekend. Till then, namaskar.